The Waterfall Fairy. As the children ran hand in hand, they did not run on the ground as you or I would have done, but gave great leaps every now and then, right over a wide mass of undergrowth, and always landed safely on the other side. Their feet seemed to skim over the surface of the ground, and Anne was never quite sure whether she was on it or off it. She held on firmly to Potty's hand, while her short curls flew back in the wind. "It's glorious," she gasped out at last. This is nothing," answered Potty, laughing. "Wait until you get on to the fairy lines." "What are they?" "Perhaps they'll rig them up this afternoon. I hope so. I think they will for the party." "Is there a party, and may I go?" Anne asked, all in one breath. He nodded. "Of course you may. I want to find Fairy Beauty to take you." As he spoke, they were gliding in and out between some huge tree trunks, now and then touching the ground with one disdainful toe and then flying on again. From over their heads came a queer squawk, like a parrot speaking or a gramophone. "Ho, ho, my little dears! Why so fast? Why so fast? Stay and have a bite of pie, now do." Startled, they both looked up quickly and saw the face of the oddest little man sticking out of a round hole in the tree trunk. He had on a long pointed cap of bright scarlet. His wide mouth opened from ear to ear. His eyes were huge and seemed to stand up out of his face and turn round and round. His ears were like great flat leaves, and he waved his tiny arms, which came out of a bright green tunic. Potty leaped so quickly that he put yards between himself and the tree in an instant, but Anne clutched him to make him stop and called out to the goblin, "I'd like to eat your pie. How do I get in?" "You mustn't go. Please don't." "Oh, Anne, it's the first thing I've ever asked you," pleaded Potty, clinging tightly to her hand. Now, Anne was the sort of little girl who, if you said "don't," immediately wanted to go and do it. But if you asked her nicely and because you loved her, she was very soft-hearted. So, for answer, she threw her arms round Potty's neck and made a face at the goblin. It was not a polite thing to do, but she felt cross. Next moment, the goblin's face disappeared, like a jack-in-the-box, and Anne and Potty were flying away for fear he should chase them. When they had run, or rather flown, and skipped and jumped quite a long way, and knew they must have left the goblin far behind, they heard the sound of water running down from a great height and splashing into a pool. Directly he heard it, Potty stopped, and holding up his finger to warn Anne to be very quiet, they crept through the bushes. And then he pointed to what looked at first like one of those great showers of gold that fall down from fireworks. The sun was shining through a break in the trees, and the light fell gloriously on a most beautiful fairy who sat in a stream. Yes, right in the stream of water that flowed over a steep fall. She was just at the top of the fall. She had the longest hair you can imagine. It was of fine gold and fell all round her like a veil, and mingled with the water and flowed on with it, so that you could not tell which was hair and which was water. It was all gold together. She had eyes like brilliant shining diamonds, and a skin as white as milk, and her hair was so glittering that it seemed to shine of itself. She took no notice of the children, but wound her hands in her hair and caught it up, scattering the drops like jewels, and then let it all run down again. She looked as cold and shining and wonderful as an icicle, and something made Anne shiver as she stared at her. "Yes," whispered Potty, "she is like that. Hair of gold, heart as cold, made of ice. She is not nice." "Oh, Potty," cried Anne in admiration, "I never knew you could make poetry." Then she looked again at the fairy. "I wish my hair was long like that," she added sadly. "Well, it will be if you go on wishing hard enough." "Is that it?" "Why, I do want it awfully. When I want to have wings for the games or sports, you know, I have to wish awfully hard days before, and then they come. You haven't got them now." "No, they drop off when I forget about them." "You hadn't to wish for them. The fairies probably gave them to you as a gift, in return for the funny way you came into the wood." Then Anne remembered something she had been wanting to ask ever since the goblin had invited her to eat his pies. "Can I eat here?" she asked. "Oh yes, if you want to. You've only to want, and you will enjoy it. But that reminds me there will be lots to eat at the party this afternoon. Come along." They hadn't gone much further before they heard the sound of someone crying in the wood. It sounded so dreadfully desolate and lonely that Anne's tender heart was sore. "That's just what I felt like when I lost you, Potty," she said, hanging on to him as he pushed forward. Then she stopped, for they had come to a little open space in the wood, sprinkled with lovely flowers, and there in front of them was the strangest sight. In the middle of the space stood a girl, taller than Anne, with her hair done up in a big fat knob behind. She had one arm over her eyes, and she stood there crying as if her heart would break. Round her were 3 native bears. Yes, real teddy bears, only alive. The 2 smallest ones were smaller than Anne, and the biggest of all was about her height. They weren't hurting the stranger girl at all, only being very, very sorry for her and trying to comfort her. And the big one said, "Ooh," in the most kindly tones, and the middle one said, "Oh, ooh," and the littlest of all just said, "Ooh, ooh, ooh," all the time. They were the jolliest little furry things you could imagine, and they looked so ridiculously distressed. Potty was smiling all over his face. "It's a take-in," he whispered. "It's Fairy Beauty, and she's tied up her hair and she's having a game with the teddy bears. They are so funny, you know, anyone can take them in. She's just pretending." Even as he spoke, the fairy dropped her arm. All her hair fell backwards. Such lovely hair it was, in great waves to her knees, and she went into peals and peals of laughter that sounded like the most lovely music. It took the 3 bumbling teddy bears a minute to understand she had been playing a trick on them, and then they too went into fits of laughter. They rolled on their backs this way and that, all 3 of them, grasping their flat feet in their funny little paws and rocking to and fro like rocking chairs. Potty rushed forward and flung himself on his knees before the fairy and began explaining, but she pushed him aside and held out her arms to Anne, who for once felt a little shy. The fairy caught her up in a great hug, crying, "So you've come, little Anne, little Anne! We've all been waiting for you, and now the fun begins."